Welcome back from lunch. Hope it was delicious. Looking forward to eating at home for a few days, my own house. So this afternoon, we are gonna walk through the bottle bill, hear about it, and then have time next week to like dive in deep to how it affects the revenues of the city more deeply and any challenges. We're not gonna have a fiscal note today. We're gonna have a presentation that will become a fiscal note because of the tight turnaround time and when the committee voted this out. And that's sort of the intentions for the afternoon. We will pick up family medical leave for further conversation if we have time. But if we don't have time, we'll just pick that up on Tuesday. And yeah, it's wild to be this flexible. And next week when we get back, it's gonna be even more flexible. So if process ever feels sort of off, please do say the word as we're pivoting when the floor takes a bajillion years or something like that. So with that, Representative Morris, so glad you're here. Would love to know why your committee recommended H-158 to us.
You would. So for the record, Representative Christy Morris, Environment and Energy. I'm sorry, we just come off the floor where we're switched. But it's the Environment and Energy Committee, which is trying to pass the expanded bottle bill again this year, H-158. As returning committee members from previous years know that we did pass this bill out of the House last year. It went to the Senate where it eventually passed, however, was not returned back to the House in time before the session ended. And so we have picked the bill up from where the Senate had it last year. We're hoping that we have made some adjustments to it to make it more palatable to people. And but it does have the same impact where we're trying to encourage the expansion of the bottle bill to include the PET plastics, that you will, which are traditionally water bills or sports drink bottles, those types of things. And there is also a caveat in here for advancing the wine bottles into the program, the glass wine bottles that we're so accustomed to seeing. So the idea is to expand more recyclable type materials into the industry as opposed to through the redemption program, opposed to the recycle or the single stream program, where a lot of that material either gets contaminated or in the case of glass can be expensive to dispose of and is not as profitable, can be problematic to the machinery, et cetera, for separation. So we're looking to capture those materials into the bottle bill, which hasn't seen a lot of changes since 1973 when it was conceived and put in place. Last year, the bill did have a increase to 10 cents for the redemption rate. We have since, through the Senate recommendation, their version that came back, we have limited that again this year to the 5 cents. So there's no increase in redemption. It is strictly for inclusion of these extra materials. Our redemption centers have been operating with the fees that they receive from the manufacturers with the commingling and mingling fees that you probably are aware of. So the non-commingling fees are smaller, usually smaller manufacturers that don't belong to the group, have a 3.5 cent handling fee, 4 cent handling fee for that. And we're proposing to raise that to 5 cents. So it's going to give them their first increase in revenue from 1973. And you can imagine the labor cost and material cost for a building and heating and everything else has gone up. So that's going to go into effect immediately upon passage of the bill. The other materials, the redemption deposits on materials will be phased in over time. We're asking for A&R to do a study on the sheets, including in this bill. So in other words, if the manufacturers would like to they've asked to retain 100% of the sheets during this process, and we've obligated or agreed that we would give them 50% of the sheets if once this bill passed and it comes into play for the setup of a PRO program, the Producer Responsibility Organization, which they belong to. So the manufacturers belong to a PRO,
Do they already belong to the PRO?
Yes. If they have 51% of the sales collectively.
Yes, sorry. And probably should save questions like that for Mr.
Okay. So the PRO will be set up by the manufacturers. Again, that they're going to have to submit a plan to A&R by October 1st of this year, 24. By March 1st of 25, the PRO stewardship plan is approved, and we're not looking to expand the bottle bill redemption until January 1st, 2027. And so 2027. Wine bottles would come in after that. So we're trying to phase this in, get the redemption centers, more materials. The PRO has responsibilities to set up additional redemption centers and additional pickups of the materials, because that's some of the problems that we're hearing from the smaller redemption centers. Is they're going to be inundated with materials is what they're envisioning, and they're not picked up adequately. So the PRO is going to have to establish that, which means we may be seeing more redemption centers in our areas. Counties will have to have at least 3 minimum, and they'll have to establish whether it's convenient to the consumer for return of the bottles for redemption. And also on those pickups, they're going to have to make sure that it's convenient for the redemption centers or stores to have that material picked up so it doesn't accumulate. That's a lot really quick, and I'm sure I left some things out. I don't know if anybody has questions on any of that concept to start with.
Representative Beck.
So what happens if 3 redemption centers don't set up in a county?
They're required to. This is establishing that the PROs have to have at least a minimum of 3 per county. And it has to be, there's also, we put some obligations in there. So if a community has a population of 7,000 people, they're required to have one. And understanding Montpelier doesn't have one right now. And
The PRO, that's
producer responsibility organization, the stewardship program that the manufacturers will be setting up.
so the manufacturers have to set up a redemption center if 3 don't just pop up on their own.
That, or if it's not convenient within a region, they'll have to establish, that'll be identified and they'll have to establish. A&R is going to be working with the PRO to determine the convenience and where the gaps are. That answer the question?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. O'Grady is going to take us, through things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just sort of building on that, folks are obligated to pick up stuff now, and I hear you sort of naming that there are some issues now around stuff not getting picked up frequently enough and maybe not having sufficient redemption centers. Do you feel like we're able to understand what the biggest barrier to that is now? And does this solve that problem, or just say more clearly, you have to do this?
It boils down to staffing, logistics or whatever. Many businesses are suffering from low staffing, so including redemption centers. We've heard from redemption centers that additional materials could cause them some heartburn, but by giving them more material at the handling fee, that's going to increase their revenues, and they'll either be able to pay their staffing appropriately, that's the goal, or hire more staffing so that they can stay open to collect these materials.
Is that part of the rationale for allowing the stewardship organization to keep more of the sheets money?
That's correct. That's correct. And recognizing right now, the sheets, the deposits that are not redeemed from these materials, that nickel stays with the state of Vermont, goes into the Clean Water Fund. With the expansion, the materials are expected to double, and that's why we're obligating 50% of the sheets to stay with the PROs back to the manufacturers so that they can set up these programs or businesses or incentivize them to be set up. And also it's the TOMRA organization that does most of the collection for the PRO. Will hopefully enhance them to expand to be able to pick up more materials.
Did you hear from them that 50% of the sheets would likely be sufficient to address all those?
They want 100% of the sheets. We're not willing to give up 100%. However, it's 100% of the sheets on the new materials. If you think about the 50% overall, and the materials are expected to double.
Was there any conversation about working with solid waste management districts? I'm trying not to use the term that
Yep.
folks have requested that we not use. Like right now in my community, I bring my compost there, I bring my trash there, I bring all the rest of my recycling. Was there any kind of consideration or conversation around sort of turning our transfer stations into redemption centers as well?
That's a good point, but to think about the number of sorts, and by sorts, you've got different sizes of containers, and if they're commingled or non-commingled, and so the amount of sorts that they have is a lot to ask on redemption centers currently, as they're currently staffed. They're collecting materials now, and at least in my district, you dump them into a chute, all of them, and the ones that are not redeemable, and they all get collected into the PET, number 1, number 2, and some of the others, they all get collected into they get tossed in together and then crushed, and that's how, or baled, and that's how they get shipped out. So this material, the new enhanced, I think would put a burden on them. It's not to say that they couldn't. And I brought this question up, is why can't the people picking up it's single stream, I think is an acceptable term. The single stream blue bins, they certainly could become a redemption center if they but it would require staffing and is different than what they're doing now, and could be seen as problematic. It could.
How does and I don't want to get back to where we were on the floor last year with all the hypotheticals, but the local blueberry juice person or whatever who's manufacturing stuff down the road right now. I can imagine how a large distributor like Coca-Cola, right, who already has the system for labeling and getting stuff back. Would the local juice producer have to become one of the members of the PRO and be a part of this whole system of gathering?
That would be encouraged, because the groups under the PRO that are commingled are paying 3.5 cents handling fee per container. If you belong to a non-commingled group, you're going to pay 5 cents under the intention of this bill. So it would make more sense for those smaller distributors to become part of the commingling group.
And is it the distributor who does that, or is it the producer of the bottle that now will be expanded to be redeemable?
The producer, or the manufacturer, the winemaker, is that what I'm hearing, or juice maker? You said juice.
Yeah. I was staying away from spirits because I don't think I don't.
Yeah. So the juice maker.
So there might be some local value-added food producers that now have to label this is redeemable by 10 cents.
If they need to meet the qualification of beverage. And of course, there is exemptions in here for milk products or plant-based milk similarities.
Let Michael O'Grady talk us through the definition of milk-like things. Yeah.
Agreed.
And then, sorry, I just want to make sure I understand the impact on the little Vermont producer or whatever. Do they just have to label it, or they also have to take the thing back? I just want to follow a can, my neighbor who makes blueberry juice or whatever. What is their responsibility?
Labeling. Label it, to label a container.
And then the store adds the cost and they receive the 10 cents and it goes to the bucket of Sheetz money and then it goes back.
So that's the 5 cents that you're talking about. So the manufacturer charges the stores, if you can use this analysis for the small guy too. So the manufacturer charges the seller, or where they're going to sell the materials, 5 cents. The store sells the product to the consumer. So the consumer has now paid the 5 cents. Now the consumer can return that to a redemption site to get their 5 cents back. And then the material gets collected by TOMRA and goes back to the industry for recycling. So,
And we can follow that same blueberry juice journey when it comes up, yeah. You had a question, Representative?
It was answered.
You did? Okay, did you have one?
Yep. Let's back to these sheets again for a minute. Did I say that right?
yes,
So 50% goes to the Clean Water Fund, and then 50% goes back to the SROs,
PRO,
PRO. It goes back to the PRO.
manufacturers.
Yep. Is that in perpetuity, or is that for the first few years to get them set up here, or how?
So we had a lot of discussion around the sheets. Manufacturers wanted 100% of them to start with,
Yeah.
all of them. We were reluctant to do that, which takes money out of the Clean Water Fund, Clean Water account. So we did agree that for the first 5 years, they could retain 100% of the new sheets, which is equivalent to 50% expectations.
And then after that, where does that?
After the 5 years,
Does that money go back into the Clean Water Fund?
it would, but we're adding, oh gosh, I've missed.
You know, it's okay.
Yep,
We can do that in the walk through the
very good.
bill.
perfect.
Does anyone have any questions about the committee's intent? Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Morris.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Yes,
What on the money, Christie, did the committee come to the conclusion that trying again to raise the nickel on the already existing materials was a losing effort?
Okay, I'm glad you brought that
I
up.
mean, because in the last iteration, I remember we had an array of comparisons of where's Vermont in the New England states, and we're not only low on the what do we collect, but low on the what kind of
Redemption.
deposit, yeah, the redemption value. And I just thought, well, gee, you know, we've been at this for 20 some odd years. Been stuck at a nickel forever.
It has. So the committee wanted to do the 10 cents again, but recognizing the efforts that we had last year and that it was reverted back to the 5 cents, that there is a provision in here that if the participation rate of redemption or return of that container, if it falls below specific amounts, then it would raise up, it'd be an inflator to a dime, or 5 cents. I shouldn't say a dime. It's a dime on the nickel containers, but could go to 20 cents on the liquor containers. I know you didn't want to talk in
Oh.
beverages, but
is this, again, committee intent?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
intent obviously is to start big with the Venus containers, because that's 3 times the old materials. It's 15.
15 cents with the inflator if the participation rate falls below 75%
Okay.
after a certain time. We give them a couple of years to stand up. The expectations are that people are going to have to adjust to this, and that the return rates, participation rates of return could actually drop that first year. That was the concern of the manufacturers, and then it should start climbing again as people get used to redemption with the newer materials.
Okay, thank you. Did you?
Well, I'm just, for the Clean Water Fund, this is just 50% of the increase in the sheets. Is that what I heard?
The existing containers, the sheets that are not redeemed, that money currently goes into the Clean Water Fund. So when this program advances to the new materials, enhanced bottle program, we're looking at 50% would remain with the Clean Water Fund. And the other 50% would go to, it's not the 50% of current, it's the 50% of the new materials.
Only of the new.
And we will, yeah, and we're gonna hear from
But
joint
anyway,
fiscal about it,
but-
all the numbers.
All right, so your intent was, what was your intent with that?
To leave the Clean Water Fund the same.
And I'm not trying to be difficult. It just gets very confusing when we ask the reporter something and
Yeah.
then we hear sort of something that might be a little slightly different from joint fiscal or something. I think it puts the
I'm
reporter in a
glad,
bad position.
yes,
Okay.
exactly. I'm glad you asked that, because I really only wanted to try to get, what was it and then what?
Yep.
And I'm glad you.
It's intended to remain the same.
You intend to have the water remain the same. we would not lose any clean water funding for 5 years. But we would lose any increase for 5 years.
That's the expectations.
Yeah, that's the intent. Okay, thank you.
Did the committee ever discuss just doing blue bin? Like just not even doing,
As the option? Yes.
just do it all blue bin.
Again, another great question, because we have two systems in Vermont. We have the blue bin system with a single stream, and we have the redemption. It's the industry that is recycling materials to make new containers that is wanting the cleaner materials. And from the blue bin sorting, there's contamination, which lowers, it's not as clean as the redemption, where most containers are clean. Some of them are even, I wash ours when we bring them back. So it's cleaner material, and that's what the industry wants in order to make new containers. And that's where we want these materials to go to, as well as to stay out of our single one and only landfill in Coventry. So the industry that's out there to make new bottles wants this material because it takes more carbon emissions, et cetera, to make new containers from raw materials than it does to make containers from existing material that can be remelted or reused into making a new bottle. So they're begging for the materials. The blue bin material is not as clean.
Representative Meadows, Representative.
I was just thinking, does the calculation for, just lost my train of thought. Does it take into account all the trucks on the road, all the Tomer trucks that go multiple times a week to all these redemption centers picking that up versus the blue bin side of things is just the truck coming into your door, picking it up that normally comes anyway? Does it take into account that?
That subject did come up in conversation,
Yeah.
and materials are going to have to be dropped off and picked up somewhere. So when you start getting into what's the savings going to be from a blue bin cycle, and in my town, I think I have 6 people that pick up materials.
Yeah.
Whether it's a single stream or blue bin or container or whatever. So we've got 6 different trucks driving around town at different times of the week to pick up materials. This probably isn't going to have an effect on reducing that. No. Tomer having more pickups. It's a single point A to point B, of course, multiple stops around the state to pick that up. So that will increase. People who redeem, that was brought up that, well, people are going to spend more time with more material, going to redemption centers. And we do ours I go up to my recycle center, or my wife and I go up to the recycle center. On the way back, we drop off at redemption. It's the same trip. It's hard to calculate that it's going to have a significant impact on carbon reduction emissions, in my opinion. Again, my opinion.
Yeah.
But the opinion of the committee was that, and we need both systems. The blue bin system versus redemption are viable businesses in Vermont. And when you talk about the clean materials versus the blue bin materials, remember there was an incident in the Burlington Solid Waste District where they accumulated tons of glass and ended up dumping it. There was absolutely no reuse in that. It wasn't even reused for a single replacement, like sand or road aggregate or whatever. It was dumped at the time. So this gets ultimately we get the wine bottles or the glass containers into the clean system through the redemption side of the equation to be made into new bottles again. And the solid waste district in Rutland that collects glass, they load it on a train car and it's trucked down south. And there's a cost for that. So, we discussed the tipping fees, could see an increase if we take some of these materials out of the solid waste district. There's a possibility, and there was like 7%. However, there's a cost to get rid of some of this heavier non-usable material that they had for recycling. So there's an expense to that. So there will be some adjustments in that cost to so-called cost to the consumer. There'll be less cost to the solid waste district. I don't know if I made that clear. Cost to the consumer could go up if we take these materials out. However, glass is one that is costly for them to get rid of. So there will be a savings there for them.
Last question.
Yeah, just going back to the sheets. So again, that's like, I pay my 5 cents when I buy my soda. It's held until it's redeemed. If it doesn't get redeemed, it stays in the sheets. And then currently 100% of that goes to the Clean Water Fund. Can you help make the connection for me between my 5 cents and the Clean Water Fund?
Sure.
For the
So
between bottles and clean water?
you've paid your 5 cents, so you made the store. The store charged you, you made the store whole, so then they can pay back the manufacturer, but the manufacturer has that 5 cents. The consumer never received it.
Sorry, I'll be more, how come the sheets goes to the Clean Water Fund? What's the connection between our bottle redemption system?
Whenever that was set up several years ago, and council may have that date, I don't. But the manufacturers used to retain and keep those as sheets without paying anybody. And the state recognized that we have needs, and clean water was one of those needs.
I
And
believe it was this committee.
We did it,
Should be asking you. Yeah.
but, that's correct. We were,
There were needs and that was a pot of money.
there were needs and simultaneously, there was a discussion, or had been periodically about the sheets and is it really their money, for Christ's sake? Pardon my French, it's on TV. Is it really their money? No, it should have been redeemed, one way or another a long time ago. And, we were looking for clean water funding and it seemed like a very logical source, and so we grabbed it. And it was a good idea, I think.
oh, you're welcome. I'd like to remind this committee, I was on the House floor on Zoom 3.5 hours last time, so I'm looking forward to any support I can get, the committee can get.
That'd be a recycled presentation.
Sounds like a grandfather.
Okay. And so, thank you.
It was a clean source of revenue, Catherine.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to make it a pun.
Clean.
but it was-
Yeah, I thought it was just gonna like.
So
evolve.
Michael's gonna join us. I know it's Friday afternoon, but we're gonna. So it's gonna be great.
Right.
Welcome.
Share.
Thank you. If you could share the screen, that would be great.
So the first thing I'm going to share, I'm not going to walk through it, I just want to show you it. It shows how the nickel moves.
Oh, yeah.
It's on the DEC website, and I can send it to Sorsha, the link to Sorsha later, but it shows how when it's sold, products first sold, manufacturer takes the nickel from the retailer. The retailer then takes it from the consumer. The consumer then is out a nickel. But when they come back to return, they go to a retailer or redemption center, they get their nickel back, so the consumer's whole. The retailer or the redemption center holds the container until the manufacturer or the manufacturer's contractor comes and picks it up. The redemption center or the retailer then gets the 5 cent deposit plus a handling fee, a fee for each container that they handle to pay for their costs of labor and other costs of redemption, and it's also part of their profit. And then the container goes back to the deposit initiator, and the initiator then moves it in the market, however they want to move it in the market. So that's how the nickel and the container flows. This bill doesn't really change that at all, except that it's going to increase the handling for non-commingled containers. So let me step back. The bill does 4 main things. It increases the handling fee for non-commingled containers from 4 cents to 5 cents. It requires manufacturers of any beverage unless it's excluded, including small, to be part of a product responsibility organization that will implement a stewardship plan for the collection of containers subject to the deposit. It will then expand the scope of the bottle deposit program effectively a year or two after the PRO is in place. And then it will amend how the abandoned beverage deposits, the sheets, are used beginning in 2026. So there will be a bit of a lag between when the sheets start being retained by the manufacturers and when the beverage container system expands. That's so that the PRO can prepare for the expansion, because the expansion will have additional costs. When the PRO first is initiated, they are going to be, I'm going to take this off if people don't mind.
No.
We certainly don't. I wanted to get you a new one that fit better, but I didn't. Yeah.
So when the PRO first starts, it's not collecting under the expanded definition of beverage. It's collecting under the existing definition of beverage. It starts with the current status, gets up and running, and then it gets these sheets to prop itself up for the expansion in 2027. And then in 2031, you're going to likely have double the sheets because you're going to have double the containers in the system. At that point, the 50% that the PRO was retaining, they no longer retain, but it doesn't go into the Clean Water Fund. It goes into the Solid Waste Management Assistance Account to be used for municipal recycling and the other uses of the Solid Waste Management Assistance Account.
It's almost like a TIF.
Oh, God.
Couldn't help it. I'm sorry.
The Clean Water Fund theoretically is going to remain whole.
Well,
And we can talk, joint fiscal would probably be the best place to discuss the projections around what wholeness or not wholeness would look like.
all right. Did the committee consider just asking for an appropriations to stand this up
That would be
out of the general fund?
Well, remember, the state isn't setting up the PRO. The manufacturers are setting up a PRO.
That's true.
They're going to form some corporate entity to run the program. And so I don't know of any really direct appropriations to corporation.
Are these please let me ask this question.
Yeah, ask away. Everyone can ask whatever
Are these
question they want. It's your
manufacturers
committee.
the same manufacturers that had been keeping their sheets without them coming back to the state for all those decades? Loaded question.
Some of them are and some of them will not be. Because with the expanded scope, you're bringing manufacturers in that were not previously in.
That's true.
And I would just want to flag that the current system is maybe not providing adequate access in its existing strengths. And we heard there was testimony from a number of redemption centers about the workforce and the space challenges with the existing system. And so the existing infrastructure is not in place, and then we're asking it to grow enormously. And so from my perspective, this idea of having some of the funding that's already in the system, ensure that as we have this huge expansion, there are sufficient funds to create the infrastructure that we need so that I don't have to have my basement full of freaking containers because I have to drive so far to take them. That feels really important to me.
Well,
Let's talk about the whole bill and never meet on a Friday afternoon again. And then after that, we can discuss the bill.
So there are 4 main revenue issues that you may want to look at. One is just the expansion of the definition of beverage, because that expands the scope, which expands the
Base of sorts.
potential for the abandoned, the sheets. One is the handling fee, which is going up from 4 to 5, but it's not really a state fee because it never touches the state. The other is the escalator clause that Representative Morris referred to, which would increase the deposit if redemption rates were not met. And then there's the sheets. So beginning on page 1, you'll see the expansion of the definition of beverage. Instead of it being by type, beer, malt beverage, mineral water, it's going to be all drinks in liquid form and intended for human consumption, except for milk, dairy products, plant-based beverages, infant formula, meal replacement drinks, or non-alcoholic cider.
Is this where we offer you hypotheticals like maple syrup? I drink it. Do other people drink it? Is it intended for?
I would not classify that as a drink, a syrup. So, then moving on, there's a change to the definition of container to focus on the material of the container, what it is made of. So it's the individual and separate bottle, can, or jar composed of glass, aluminum, or other metal, polyethylene terephthalate, which is PTE, or high-density polyethylene, HDPE. So if you're a beverage in that container, you are subject to the beverage container deposit law beginning in 2027. There are exceptions for the container. If it's non-carbonated with a volume greater than 2 1/2 liters, it's not going to be subject to the bill. If it's carbonated with a volume greater than 3 liters, it's not subject to the bill.
Brian, I don't know what the technical term for a nip is.
Nips are later on.
Great.
They're 50 milliliters. They are currently excluded. Liquor in general is really not being modified.
Okay, thank you.
DLL is going to continue to run that program under its current requirements, which include taking back the abandoned container deposits already for their use for department costs.
Okay, and I'm gonna wait until we get to that section.
Okay.
Excuse my lack of discipline.
So moving on in the definition sections, there's definitions of cider and hard kombucha that are being added because the way that vinous beverages are defined in Vermont under Title VII, cider, hard cider, and hard kombucha technically are vinous beverages because you can see in the definition of vinous beverage, they're manufactured or obtained from the natural sugar content of fruit caused by fermentation. So they are being defined so that they can be excluded from the definition of vinous beverage on page 2, lines 18 and 19, so that they are not subject to the same deposit that a wine bottle is subject to. A can of hard cider is still going to have a 5-cent deposit. A can of hard kombucha is going to have a 5-cent deposit. A bottle of wine is going to have a 15-cent deposit. So that's why those definitions are there, so that they are excluded from the definition of vinous beverage. That brings you to page 3.
We have a question that doesn't bring.
The only worry about listing material container content type rather than what it holds, or I guess the problem is recurrent no matter. You've only listed 2 flavors or blends of plastics, as we commonly call them. And it's just a combination of those existing materials. The chemical industry is very inventive. And I just worry about, when you list, as you know, you meant to include everything you said, but not the things you didn't say. Is that problematic, I guess?
I mean, theoretically, you are correct. The manufacturers could attempt to manipulate that definition, but these are currently
standards.
The standards. And if they were to change and there was significant change in the container industry, I would think that the General Assembly would respond.
just was wondering if, because DLL will use this as a basis for rulemaking,
Well, this is A and R.
I'm sorry.
Right.
But A&R can
Yeah.
use this for rulemaking, or the solid waste division,
Yeah.
whether there isn't a way to make crystal clear what the rulemaking parameters are without binding that rulemaking to those two ingredients.
I'll talk about that
Okay.
a little bit
Getting
later,
to, yeah,
because that was discussed,
okay,
and the agency didn't like it.
okay. Shoot.
Representative Beck, did you have something?
No, I don't.
I like totally hallucinated. Okay. Oh, it was you.
Oh, yeah, it was me.
Your hands are right next to each other. Sorry about that.
Anthony raises a good question, but having been observing the waste stream for quite a period of time, the trend has been towards more standardization of plastics rather than newfangled kinds.
And we might be able to,
Yes.
we might be able to solve it with a sentence or two about intent.
Might be able to solve what?
Solve this question with a sentence about the intent. Like, we've got these things listed, but we intend to cover anything that they morph into over time.
That would be up to you.
I like it.
So we are on page
3, going on to.
of 26. There's a storm coming that's starting in Brattleboro and moving north. I don't want to be here for the rest of my life, though I would
Okay.
like to finish this. So I think it would be helpful if we could go through the whole bill, and then we're going to have a conversation about it next week. Not next week. If people,
Recap.
Yeah.
if we never get through it, we will be here next week talking about it.
All right, page 3, line 22, the existing deposit currently, the existing deposit on every container except liquor is 5 cents. But then on page 4, you are adding a deposit for wine containers, which will be 15 cents. And then you'll see the chair's question about the small liquor bottles, line 6. That's where they are excluded from the deposit. Anything with less than 50 milliliters is not subject to the deposit. Liquor is subject to 15 cents. Because there's going to be reporting about redemption rates on all 3 categories of containers, the vinous beverage containers, the liquor containers, and all other containers, DLL is going to be reporting to A&R about the amount of containers they collect and the redemption rate for those containers. Then on the bottom of page 4, line 21, you'll see the increase in the handling fee for non-commingled beverages, and that goes from 4 to 5 cents. Moving on page 5, there's a provision in law currently that containers have to be redeemed no fewer than 40 hours per week. Those establishments that sell them or at redemption centers, nobody does this, and A&R doesn't enforce it. So it's being struck.
Representative Taylor.
Back on page 4, that it refers to a little shall report to the secretary. Has that report already been defined? I mean, do we know what that report is?
This is that report. They give the amount and tonnage of liquor bottles that DLL collected, and they provide the redemption rate for liquor bottles in the previous calendar year. Okay. You see the rules, you'll see that the rulemaking is not going away, it's just being moved, but the specific provisions here with the change and how the bottle bill will work, they're really obsolete. And so this section of rulemaking is being repealed. And I'll talk about Representative Anthony's question later about the scope of rulemaking when we get to the new rulemaking section. So right now, those retailers that sell a product are required to provide for redemption of that product. But what is being provided on page 6, lines 9 through 14, once the PRO is stood up and they're implementing an approved stewardship plan, a retailer will be allowed to refuse redemption if the PRO is working, stewardship's in place, and the retailer's building is less than 5,000 square feet. This is to address concern, especially of small retailers, that they're not going to have the space in order to handle the expanded scope of redemption. They won't have to redeem if the PRO is up and working. There's a conforming amendment on that on lines 15. Because there's now this exemption, we had to reference that exemption when a person is allowed to refuse to redeem a beverage container. Then you get to the labeling requirements. Right now, there's certain information that's required to be on a container, including on the top of metal containers. Well, it's kind of hard for some of the new types of metal containers to put that information on top of like a bottle cap. So what is being allowed is that for metal containers that there will be, or actually it's going to be for any container, that their A&R can approve the method for securing the information to the container. It has to currently provide the refund value on the container, but what is being offered on pages 7, lines 1 through 7 are alternatives to 5 cents. You could put the refund value on there on line 5, or you could put just the words refund value as long as it follows the letters VT, or you could put the letters RV. So it could say VT RV, and that would be enough to properly label the container.
I remember extensive testimony last year from a local beer manufacturer about the trouble of this. So I appreciate that the committee took care of that.
So the agency is trying to provide some flexibility in labeling, not on top of the container, not just the 5 cents, et cetera. One of the next major parts of the bill is that each beverage container sold or offered for sale that's subject to the deposit shall include the universal product code and a barcode. So that's theoretically to allow for electronic sorting that will make sorting faster and easier, especially when the bottle bill expands. And then you come to page 8, line 4.
We have a question.
Do you want to hold off my nits until a week from now?
That would be great.
Okay, I can do that.
Page 8, line 4. As I think most people understand, wine is probably maybe already bottled and maybe already labeled, and it doesn't have the deposit information on it. This language allows the secretary to allow a manufacturer, distributor, or retailer to put a adhesive sticker with the deposit information on the bottle. If the secretary allows that, then either the manufacturer, the distributor, or the retailer can put the sticker on. That's what the state did when liquor was brought into the program. On page 8, lines 12 through 14, the default maximum penalty of $1,000 for violation is being struck because A&R's general enforcement authority is going to be used, and that has much larger maximum penalties. And Representative Beck's question, what happens if a PRO stops complying or a PRO doesn't provide for convenience, or there isn't a collection site for 3 in his county? Well, then A&R can enforce. And A&R can issue penalties for failure to comply. Currently, A&R requires redemption centers to be certified by them. But going into the future, and you'll see this at the very end of the bill, this requirement is going to be struck because the PRO is going to have to identify where its redemption sites are. And the redemption sites are going to be basically incorporated into the PRO. So A&R is going to get out of the business of certifying redemption sites. But until that PRO goes into place, the requirement that a certified redemption center redeems more than the requirement that if a redemption center redeems more than 250,000 containers per year, they shall participate in a commingling agreement. That's going away. It's likely not happening. And so for the next 2 or 3 years, that requirement won't be on the books, but then this section will be repealed.
1 second.
Can you just explain why A&R is giving up the review and certification of redemption centers?
So basically, they're going to give up 2 requirements that are currently on the book. One is that all manufacturers register their beverages with A&R before they sell the beverage in the state. That's because under the PRO requirements, the PROs has to identify every beverage that's going to be sold in the state and has to list every beverage that's sold in the state. And the plan must be approved in order for them to sell. So basically, you don't have to have a registration of the beverage and the PRO listing because they're basically duplicate. It's similar idea with the Redemption Center. The Redemption Center right now is being certified by A&R, but under the PRO, it has to meet the PRO's requirements for operation. It has to be part of the PRO. A&R really doesn't need to certify it anymore.
So my little general store that has like a side thing will be obligated to be a part of the PRO to maintain operating as a redemption.
Remember, there's an exception, 5,000 square feet or less. You can refuse to redeem if the PRO is up and running.
Okay, so you don't have to become a part of it.
Right.
And then my neighbor with the blueberry juice, like, how do they learn that they have to communicate with the PRO to be on the list to sell their beverage in the?
So that's a requirement of any manufacturer. And it does apply to, there is no small manufacturer exemption in this bill, as, for example, as opposed to the covered household hazardous products.
Was there any testimony from little juice operators?
Not that I know of.
Representative Anthony.
I just, not to slow us up too much, I want to flag what I suspect may be a future missing lever of success. Since the whole idea is to set up the PROs, lighten the load on the solid waste districts who are now being inundated with this stuff which has no value, why wouldn't we also make sure that the regional solid waste districts had some leverage in the performance of the PROs? I'm thinking of a right of action or some other thing, because now the whole architecture depends on A&R making rules and using its enforcement.
Representative Anthony, that is.
Sorry, yeah.
Policy changing, not understanding the bill that is in front of us.
But you are about to get into the architecture, so it's kind of a timely point to talk about the architecture. Because this is where you get to the requirement that no manufacturer or distributor may sell or distribute a beverage container in the state without participating in a secretary-approved PRO. So
Which
they
page
all.
is this again? Sorry.
Pardon?
Which page are we on now?
You are on page 9, line 8 through 10.
Okay, thank you.
So every manufacturer distributor needs to participate in the PRO, and the PRO needs an approved plan. On or before January 1, 2024, they apply to the secretary to form the PRO. The secretary may approve that PRO for 10 years if the PRO has capacity and they don't create unreasonable burdens for other manufacturers to participate in the PRO. And after approval, the PRO maintains that website with its name and business information and the name of each beverage and the container size covered by the plan. If the PRO fails to implement any of the requirements, this is partly Representative Beck's question, the secretary may dissolve the PRO, but they can also enforce against the PRO and penalize the PRO. And if the manufacturers can't form a PRO, dysfunction or otherwise, the secretary has 2 options. The secretary can mandate the formation of that PRO, or the secretary can administer its own plan and then charge the manufacturers the cost of the plan administration plus a additional 10% cost. So that's the incentive for the manufacturers to actually do their own plan. That they don't want to be stuck paying for the state's plan and then paying big on top of that. And so then you get to page 11, the PRO reimburses A&R for all oversight costs in administering the chapter. That's important in the startup because there is no registration fee here. You don't see a fee for the manufacturers as a PRO to register with the state. And this is why, because A&R is just going to be reimbursed for their costs.
How will their costs be determined?
Well, that isn't set out and
But it's a bill back mechanism.
basically, yeah.
That's not set out.
Manufacturers of liquor are exempt because, as we already discussed, liquor containers are managed by DLL. Then you get to the architecture of the plan, the plan elements, what the PRO needs to do. They need to provide for convenience of collection. It has to ensure that consumers have convenient opportunities to redeem beverages containers. The plan shall take reasonable efforts to cite points of redemption across all regions of the state to allow for convenient and reasonable access to all Vermonters for redemption opportunities. A plan shall document how redemption services will be available. There has to be at least 3 points of redemption per county and provide an immediate return. At least 1 point of redemption per municipality with a population of 7,000 or more. And efforts to cite redemption sites in areas with high density population or designated centers. And then there's a provision about fair compensation and fair compensation to redemption centers. So the plan shall satisfy all the following requirements. It shall describe how all locations that redeem beverage containers are fairly compensated for their participation. It's going to be more than the handling fee. They're going to be part of the infrastructure of the PRO. So there's going to be compensation that's likely going to be more than the handling fee. There shall not be barriers to participation in the collection program for redemption centers. It'll describe how management and sorting of containers at redemption centers is minimized. And the plan shall describe how materials will be picked up at redemption centers. The plan shall maximize the use of existing infrastructure when establishing points of collection. So that does not rule out the use of your solid waste management entity as a redemption center or potential redemption center under the program. There are education requirements. There's a requirement that the PRO consult with stakeholders on the development of the plan. And then there's reporting. At a frequency required by the secretary, but not less than annually, the PRO reports the following: their contact information, the amount in containers and tons and material type of beverage containers redeemed under the plan, in the categories of vinous beverage containers and all other beverage containers. Remember, DLL is already reporting to A&R what they're collecting in the redemption rate for liquor bottles. This is where the PRO reports what they're collecting in the redemption rates for these two categories. They report the location and amount of material that was recycled and what what products the beverage material was recycled into. They report the carbon impacts. They report the cost of administration of the plan, including the cost of collection, management, and transportation. They describe any improvements for convenience. They describe any improvements for environmental impacts. They describe efforts taken by or on behalf of the PRO to improve. There's two environmental impact reports, one on the product life cycle and reusability of the containers, and the other on the environmental outcomes of the program itself.
Before you leave that, Michael, I noticed in the proposal of the PROs covering household hazardous waste, there's a hold harmless for the manufacturers to collude only in the specific duties that are contained in the legislation. Would that grease the skids at all in this context to get together and set up the PRO networks?
It would, now that I think about it,
I didn't see it.
it's not in here.
Okay,
Probably should be in here,
well, it's just a thought,
so.
because I think they would use that as an excuse. Well, we can't do that because.
The program does 2 audits. One's a fiscal audit every 5 years to look at the cost of the PRO. And that one's a program audit every 5 years to see how the program's working. And then one's a fiscal audit, which is annual, to look at how much the program cost and its expenditures, et cetera. Both of the audits, the results are provided to A&R. Then you get to section 1534. This sets out the redemption rate goals. It's going to be 75%, 80 in 2026, 80% in 2030, 85% in 2035, 90 in 2040. Then on page 16, you'll see beginning July 1, 2025, A&R submits to you a written report and annually thereafter, providing the redemption rates for the 3 categories: liquor bottles, vinous beverage containers, and all others. And then you get to the escalator. And so that's why you're getting the report on redemption rates for the 3 categories, because on beginning January 1, 2028, if A&R determines that the redemption rate goal established just above was not met for 1 or more of the beverage containers listed for 2 consecutive years, the beverage container deposit for the category shall increase by 5 cents, provided that the maximum deposit for any beverage container category shall not exceed 20 cents, provide vinous beverage containers and liquor bottles, and shall not exceed 10 cents for every other container. And within 1 year following the Secretary's determination, the manufacturers and distributors have time to comply with the requirements of the section for their containers, specifically labeling the new amount on the container if necessary. Okay. Then you get to rulemaking. The rulemaking is a broad grant of rulemaking to administer the chapter. The committee did discuss giving the agency the ability to adopt rules to exempt certain containers or expand the scope of containers, including size of containers. The agency said they didn't want that. The agency said that they thought that was a policy decision of the General Assembly, and they didn't want the rules to conflict with statute as to what a container is or the size of the container. So the committee agreed with the agency and did not, there was language at one point that would have done that, but they agreed not to do that. On page 17, section 2, this is where the 50% of the sheets is going to be retained by the PRO. This does not go into effect immediately. It does not go into effect until 2026. So in 2026, 50% of the sheets are retained by the PRO to implement the requirements of the chapter. You'll see that section 3 amends the very exact same subdivision, because that's in 2031, you are undoing the PRO's ability to retain the 50%. That goes away. So section 2 is effective 2026, section 3 is effective 2031 to undo the PRO's authority to retain the sheets. Section 4 is really.
So we're putting it in and then later we take it out. what's the time difference? When-
5 years.
5 years, they get money to do all this, and then hopefully it's smooth operating and they don't need that
Yep.
money anymore.
Yep. Okay. Section 4 is really an administrative thing. It's one of it dictates how A&R will notice the plan for public review. It's just their default type 4, or is it type 3? Type 3 notice procedure. And then you get to section 5. This is where the Clean Water Fund will be effective in 2031. This is effective in 2031. 50% of the sheets will go into the Clean Water Fund. Because remember, in 2031 is when you take 50% away from the PRO. And then that 50% you took away from the PRO in section 6 goes into the solid waste management assistance account on page 21, lines 15 and 16. The whole concept is to make and keep the Clean Water Fund whole in its revenue from the sheets. Don't move the money until the system is expanded. It's honestly, it's a little bit before it's expanded, but you're gonna not really affect the revenue that goes into the Clean Water Fund.
And I think she understands the construct and just doesn't like it.
Okay.
We'll talk to JFO after.
All right. I can't remember who asked about the climate impacts, whether or not that will be looked at. When universal recycling first went into place in 2012, that was a requirement of the bill that did that. And it was required to look at the overall cost of the bottle bill, the overall cost of just doing single stream, and the overall cost of doing kind of the hybrid that we maintain today. Basically, the report recommended to continue with the hybrid. Section 7 requires a similar systems analysis of the new system beginning January 15, 2025. It will have an estimate of the total systems cost because remember, expansion doesn't happen until 2027. So this is going to be through modeling, just like the 2013 report was. And it will include a review of the cost from climate impacts, page 22, line 9. And then it will estimate the cost on the current recycling system, how the expansion will affect material recovery facilities, and an estimate of the impacts on tipping fees at each material recovery facility. So it's going to look at what potential cost expansion will have. And it will look at an estimate of the cost of operating a redemption center and other alternate points of redemption under a stewardship plan. And we'll also look at an impact on the overall recycling in the state and redemption. And it will then analyze whether or not the PRO and the plan will be better if the PRO retained 100%, 50%, or 0% of the sheets. Because the manufacturers do want 100%, but will that really improve the plan or not? So this systems analysis will look at it. It will also estimate the impact on the Clean Water Fund, if there is going to be an impact on the Clean Water Fund.
Where does that report go?
Pardon?
Where does that report go?
That report comes to you.
Great.
House Environment and Energy and Senate Natural Resources.
That's not us.
Well, I meant
The legislature.
Oh, can it come to us too, please?
But I can build, if you want, your committee in. Section 8 repeals those two sections I referred to earlier that become obsolete when the PRO is operating. You don't have to register your beverage with A&R. You don't have to get your redemption center certified by A&R. Those are repealed on March 1, 2025. Section 9 gives partly represent Anthony's question. It gives A&R some discretion during the transition. They're dealing with it now. And I got a question from someone on this as well. The ready-to-drink spirit beverages. So many of them were manufactured before you changed the law last year to say that their deposit is 5 cents. So many of them say that their deposit is 15 cents. And arguably, they should not be sold because they're mislabeled. So, but A&R is allowing them to be sold with the 5 cent collected, but the 15 cent redeemed.
Whoa.
Because you can't determine when that person bought that can.
Wild times.
So we should all go buy more to get 10 cents back.
This is how we're gonna fund the State House expansion.
Oh, dear.
So much for the clean water fund.
What section 9 does,
Thank you. I don't think there are that many ready to drinks in that category. I think clean water fund's okay. Back to you.
section 9 basically gives A&R some discretion in that expansion period to allow beverage containers to be sold or redeemed that do not meet the labeling requirements, determine whether a beverage or container is subject to the requirements due to the nature of the beverage or the composition of the container, and then exercise discretion in the administration and enforcement for categories or types of beverages or beverage containers. But that authority is not ongoing. It would be repealed on March 1, 2028. They basically get a year to help those manufacturers and make those determinations. Part of the systems analysis is looking at how the recycling industry is going to be affected. Well, currently, under the bottle bill system, A&R doesn't get information on what is exactly collected and the materials that are collected and how they're dispositioned. So in order to do the systems analysis, they need to get that information from the manufacturers or distributors. It will be largely through TAMRA. They already get this information from the material recovery facilities and other solid waste facilities that they certify. And then you get to the effective dates. I should have brought my timeline. I have a timeline for this. There it is. But I can provide that to the committee. Do you want me to go through the timeline?
That would be great.
So first thing is the bill's effective July 1, 2023. That's when the handling fee change goes into place. So the increase from 4 to 5 cents for non-commingled goes into effect July of this year. January of 2024, the manufacturers have to apply to A&R to form a PRO. And that's for the beverage containers as they are currently defined. It's not under the expanded, it's as beverage containers are currently defined, they need to form a PRO. January 15th, 2024, DLL starts annually reporting to A&R what they've collected and their redemption rate for liquor bottles. October 1, 2024, an approved PRO submits a stewardship plan to A&R. January 15th, 2025, A&R submits its systems analysis of the beverage container system. That's kind of your pressure release valve. You get to see what it's going to cost, what's going to have the impact on MRFs, impacting on basically recycling. You'll have an opportunity to do what you want to do at that point. March 1, 2025, that's when each beverage container sold or offered for sale in the state needs a UPC and a barcode. March 1, 2025, that's when beverage containers are prohibited from sale unless they're covered by the PRO, and that's current scope of beverage containers.
It was just a little.
Okay.
Thanks, team.
March 1, 2025, that's when the repeal of beverage registration and A&R certification redemption centers goes into effect. July of 25, A&R submits to the General Assembly a report containing the current redemption rate and annually thereafter. January 2026, that's when the PRO retains 50% on bottle deposits. March 1, 2026, that's when the audits start. January 1, 2027, that's when the scope of the beverage containers subject to the deposit expands. So remember, they've already set up the PRO in March of 2025. It expands in January 2027. January 1, 2028, that's when the first beverage redemption rate goal will be analyzed. That's the first opportunity for the escalator to go into effect. March 1, 2030, that's the third-party audit of the stewardship plan for its operation. July 1, 2031, the PRO no longer gets the sheets and the 50% goes into the solid waste management assistance account.
Any clarifying questions?
If it's for a different kind of product that an EPO was being formed for, and the infrastructure didn't already exist to collect it, who would have to put up the money for that?
It would still be well, I'm just going to speak generally in PRO, EPR terms. There's options.
Like?
For example, when you did batteries, you said the manufacturer assumed that responsibility, but the manufacturer could work with current retailers to be collection sites. And that's basically what happened. When you did paint, you decided that you wanted a fee on it. And the paint, basically, you brought the paint stores in and they said that they would be willing to do that. And that they would be willing to be redemption places because that brings them people back into their stores. They don't have a lot of foot traffic, like a hardware store, some of the paint stores. So they were willing to do that. Or you can just mandate what the redemption requirements, convenience collection requirements are. You kind of did for lamps.
Lamps.
Yeah.
Not light bulbs, lamps.
Lamps. That's the technical.
Oh, I remember that bill, I just didn't remember they were called lamp. Okay, thank you.
So,
Does anybody else, any other state do it with whatever, for redemption bottles?
does any other state have, well, honestly, the bottle bill is a PRO. Because most states have either, like Oregon, like the state has mandates that basically make them work together, even though it's not technically a PRO. Or there's commingling agreements, which is basically a PRO.
I wasn't trying not to do the PRO.
Right.
I didn't speak clearly enough. Where do the other people get the money? The other organizations that are part of the PRO to do their.
So again, generally with EPR, the pure kind of EPR, the manufacturers pay the cost to run the program, and then the costs are allocated among the manufacturers, usually by sales data. And will it add a cost to Vermonters? Not specifically, but secondarily, because the manufacturers we're not going to assume all these costs without passing them on. But as you've seen with the other EPR programs, there was anxiety about price increases on the relevant products. The example that I remember clearly was TVs. There was going to be an argument that every TV was going to cost $150 more. And like TV prices went down. And it's about market. It's about what the manufacturers can make on their bottom line. And I can't say for sure how this will affect their market, but I assume that the cost is going to be much less divided among all manufacturers when compared to their overall profit in the state.
That was a good answer.
Representative Matson.
Yeah, thanks. In regards to paint, for example, I live on the border. I buy paint in Norwich and I buy paint in West Lebanon, and I don't think it makes any difference really. I mean, people shop in West Lebanon because everything's there. It's just been there for decades and decades. It's convenience, it's not taxes or fees or anything.
So I think with that, we were going to have joint fiscal index, but they seem to be held up in another committee that's doing markup on something. And so we're gonna say goodbye to each other for a week.
Oh, shucks.
All right.